Mind. The first time Bryce Whitcomb called me an old man, it was 6:52 in the evening, and I was holding a glass of unsweetened tea on my own front porch. Mind. He was 19, built like a linebacker who spent more time in front of mirror than a weight rack, and he said it with the kind of confidence that only comes from never once losing anything that mattered. He had no idea what he was talking about, too. Mind. For 6 years, I had built a life around being forgettable. Mind. That was the whole design. After 17 years in Marine Corps Force reconnaissance, including 4 deployments I still don't talk about at dinner parties, I traded my kit bag for a lawnmower and a coffee maker that takes exactly 4 minutes to brew. Mind. My name is Marcus Doyle. I run a small risk assessment consultancy out of a converted garage. I coach my daughter's travel softball team on weekend. And until the Whitcombs bought the 3-acre lot next to mine, the biggest disturbance on our street was a raccoon getting into somebody's trash. Mind. Braddock Hollow, it's outside Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of neighborhood where the news gets more engagement than the local news. Mind. Wide lawns, slow mornings, nobody locks their car. I liked it that way. And so did my 16-year-old daughter, Callie, who had grown up here thinking the scariest thing in the world was a thunderstorm during a softball game. Designed, Gerald Whitcomb changed the temperature of the whole street before he'd even finished unpacking. And he arrived in a black Range Rover with the paper still from the plates, hollering 3 instructions to movers down. Could 3 imply him about scratched hardwood. And he'd made his money buying up failing regional freight companies and squeezing them until they were profitable again, and he wore that history like cologne. Loud everywhere, impossible to ignore, but Gerald wasn't the problem. Not really. The problem moved in behind him, 19 years old, 6'2", with the kind of muscle that comes from a personal trainer and not a job. And Bryce wanted to just play a regional contact tournament through Titan Forge Combat Academy downtown, and he wanted the entire zip code to know it. And within 4 days, hung a heavy bag from the oak tree at the property line, and around 5 o'clock, like clockwork, he'd come out shirtless in his gold-embroidered belt and go to war with 180 pounds of vinyl and sand. I want to be clear about something, because it matters later. I didn't hate the kid for training hard. Discipline is discipline, wherever you find it. What I noticed, sitting on my porch with my coffee, was that his footwork was built for judges and trophies, not for a bad night in a parking lot. His chin rode high. He telegraphed his right hand a full second before he threw it. He'd been taught to perform violence, not survive it. That distinction would turn out to matter a great deal. It started small, the way these things always do. He'd block the sidewalk when neighborhood kids rode by on their bikes, forcing them into the road, laughing when they wobbled. He chest bumped a delivery driver, a man named Otis Grant, who'd been running that route for 11 years, over a package left 2 inches inside the property line, until Otis backed up with both hands raised just to end it. Small cruelties. The kind that don't show up on any police report, but that add up in a neighborhood like sediment at the bottom of a glass. The first time he came at my family directly, it was a Tuesday, 4:40 in the afternoon, and Callie was washing my truck in the driveway with the on at a perfectly reasonable volume. Bryce walked over from his yard without a word, reached through the open window, and snapped the volume knob clean off. My head hurts, he told her, flat as a doormat. Keep it down. I was down the driveway in under 4 seconds. And I want you to understand something about how I moved, because it tells you everything about who I used to be. I didn't run. Running is panic, and panic invites more of whatever's coming. I walked, hands loose, shoulders relaxed, The exact posture they teach you in de-escalation courses that also happens to be the fastest platform in the world to strike from if it comes to that. Is there a problem here? I asked him in the same tone I'd used to ask about the weather. Bryce sized me up the way a 19-year-old sizes up a man in a flannel shirt and gardening boots. I'm 44'6'1", and on any given day, I look like somebody who alphabetizes Knots who once had a laser sight crawl across it in a country I'm not allowed to name in casual conversation. When your nervous system has been recalibrated by things most people only see in movies, a 19-year-old in athletic short does not register as a threat. It registers as a variable. Your kid's radio is annoying, he said, stepping into my space, reeking of cologne and pre-workout. I handled it. You got a problem with that? Brett, I said, quiet. I'm Marcus. This is my property, and that's my daughter. Touch my truck again or step toward her again, and we're going to have a serious misunderstanding. Go home. He laughed that dismissive, performative laugh boys do when they've decided calm means weak, and walked off muttering something about watching my back. I let him have the last word. A man who's actually dangerous doesn't need one. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong, and I should have known I was wrong, because bullies don't read calm as strength. They read it as an invitation. By the second week of August, things had curdled from obnoxious into something else entirely. Bryce had just taken first pleasing vision, and Gerald threw a party loud enough to out auto picture frames till 40 complete with a rented DJ booth and a caterer running 6 chafing dishes on my side of the fence line. 2 days later, Callie had 4 friends over on our back patio for a study session, and Bryce decided that was exactly the kind of audience he'd been missing. He brought his gear out to the property line and started shadowboxing, throwing kicks that snapped branches. My late wife's lilac bush, the one I double kept alive for 9 years because she'd planted it the spring before she passed. The girls glanced over, he'd wink or make a kissing sound, low and ugly. Kelly texted me 4 words from 20 feet away. Dad, I feel unsafe. Something in my chest went cold and very, very quiet. I walked out to the property line. Bryce, stop breaking the bushes. He stopped mid-kick, breathing hard, sweat running down his stern. 2 of his gym buddies laughing from lawn chairs a few feet behind him, a full foot inside my property. Not that facts had ever mattered to him. They're hanging over the line, he lied. I'm doing landscaping, Marcus. You want to stop me? I don't care about the bushes, I told him, and I meant it. I care about you harassing my daughter. Take it somewhere else. His face went hydrant. He marched right up to the invisible scene between our lawns. You disrespecting me in front of my boys? I'm a black belt under Coach Dalton Reyes. I could fold you in half, old man. And to punctuate it, he reached across the line and grabbed a fistful of my collar. I need you to understand what happens in a body that's had 17 years of muscle memory carved into it. My conscious mind hadn't even finished processing the grab before my hips had already pivoted, before my left hand had trapped his wrist against the guy's chest, before my thumb had found the nerve bundle in his forearm and folded his elbow up and over. It's a compliance hold. It's taught in a single afternoon to 18-year-old recruits. It put a 190-pound tournament winner face first into freshly cut grass in under a second, and he yelped like a man twice his age with a bad back. I let go immediately and stepped back, hands up, playing clumsy for the audience of his own friends. Whoa, careful, Bryce. Watch the tree roots there. It looked, to anyone watching from 20 feet away, exactly like a stumble. That was the point. His face was in a purple, humiliated, trailing a wrist. Nednessy told me everything about how the next few weeks were going to go. Mind. You tripped me? He stammered. Watch your step, I said, then turned my back on him, which is generally terrible advice against an aggressor, unless you already know with total certainty exactly what kind of aggressor you're dealing with. Mind. Bryce Whitcomb was a bully. Bullies run on fear, and nothing short-circuits a bully faster than being casually dismissed in front of an audience, heaped specifically to watch him win. Mind. An hour later, Gerald Whitcomb was pounding on my front door hard enough to rattle the glass. Mind. You laid hands on my son, he shouted, before I'd even gotten it fully open, Bryce sulking behind him like a kick dog who'd already decided the story he was going with. Mind. He said you threw him to the ground. Your son grabbed my shirt, Gerald. Mind. He lost his balance. Check your own cameras. Gerald jabbed a finger into my chest hard enough to leave a mark. Mind. My boy is a champion fighter. He doesn't trip. You touch him again, and I will sue you into the dirt, and then I'll let him finish the job himself. Mind. He turned and stormed back across the lawn, and Bryce shot me a look over his shoulder that had already rewritten the entire afternoon into a victory. Mind. In his head, I'd gotten lucky. In his head, his father had put the neighborhood weirdo back in his place. Mind. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen sink for a long time. Mind. Something in me, call it professional instinct, call it just knowing men like Whitcomb understood. This wasn't over. It wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a date on a calendar nobody had written down yet. And that date turned out to be Labor Day. The first Monday in September at Braddock Hollow's annual block, Cookboon, our street, that actually pulled every family out of their houses at once. Grills lined the cul-de-sac, and through a sprinkler somebody's dad had hooked up wrong. I was standing near the cooler with Walter Higgins, a retired accountant who'd lived on the street for 22 years and had strong, specific opinions about brisket when the Whitcombs' golf cart rolled up. Bryce wasn't dressed for a cookout. He had on his gym's branded rash guard grappling shorts and a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, trailed by 3 guys from Titan Forge with the exact same walk he had, the one that says, "Look at me," before anyone's actually looking. He cut straight through a group of 6-year plug tank pants, raking straight, dropped at my feet with a heavy thud, and went quiet. In that particular way, a room goes quiet, right before something happens that everybody's going to talk about for years. "Hey, Marcus," he said, loud enough to carry over the radio somebody had going near the coolers. We never finished our conversation. "It's a cookout, Bryce. Go eat a burger. I don't eat garbage." He unzipped the bag, pulled out a pair of 4-ounce MMA gloves, and tossed one at my boots. "You got lucky tripping me when I wasn't looking. Let's see how tough you are in front of your kid." One-on-one, no cheap tricks. I want you to sit with this moment for a second because it's the hinge the entire rest of this story swings on. Ron Pemberton, our HOA president, stepped in with his hands up, saying something about how this was a family event. Bryce told him to shut up without even looking at him. I glanced over and found Callie standing near the curb, 16 years old, face gone the color of paper, watching to see what her father was going to do. 20 feet to my left, Gerald Whitcomb stood by the golf cart with a beer in hand and a smile that told me he'd been hoping for exactly this since the day they'd moved in. Here's the calculation I ran, and it took about a second and a half. If I walked away, Bryce would read it as final proof I was afraid of. And he'd spend the next 4 years of proximity making that fear a daily habit for my daughter. If I called the police over a pair of gloves thrown at my feet, nothing would happen before the harassment simply moved somewhere less visible. He was a dog that had been chasing a car for 2 months, and he had absolutely no plan for what he'd do if he ever caught it. I looked at Callie. I gave her one small nod. Mind. And I looked back at Bryce. You really want to do this? Here now? Scared, old man. He was already strapping the Velcro on his gloves with his teeth, his buddies snickering behind him. Mind. I didn't pick up the gloves at my feet. Gloves protect the hand that's wearing them, not the person on the other end of it, and I had no intention of needing that kind of protection. Mind. I took off my flannel, set it on the cooler, and walked out to the center of the grass in a plain gray t-shirt, and Gerald laughed loud enough for the whole street to hear him tell his son to show nobody what a real man looked like. And I stopped in the middle of the lawn and settled into absolute to would mean absolute arts judge, hands pinned down, weight centered, the kind of readiness posture that's built for one purpose only, which is ending things quickly and without ceremony. Mind. To Bryce, watching from 6 feet away with his blood already up, it just looked like I didn't know what I was doing. Rules? He asked, bouncing on his toes. Just one, I said. Mind. When you're ready to quit, you'll be on the ground. Mind. He didn't wait for anybody's signal. And looping in with a stiff right cross aimed at my jaw, the exact 1-2 I'd watched him drill against heavy bag for 2 months. Chin pulse warning built right into his shoulder before the punch ever left his hand. And to the neighbors watching, it looked fast. To someone who'd spent a career reading exactly that kind of committed telegraphed aggression, it looked like it was happening underwater. Mind. I stepped inside the arc of his right hand, instead of away from it the last direction he expected, and the punch went sailsy past my shoulder into empty air. Mind. Before his brain had finished registering the miss, I put one open hand on his triceps and the other on his chest and simply redirected the momentum he'd already built, anti-QQTs in him exactly where his own body wanted to go, only faster and with considerably less control. Mind. He stumbled 6 feet past me, boots tearing tivets out of the grass, arms windmilling, and only just caught himself before hitting the asphalt. Mind. Lucky step. He spat. Higher on his toe now, the good kind of adrenaline long gone and replaced with the ugly kind that floods your vision and makes your limbs feel like sandbags. Mind. He abandoned his hands entirely and went for the thing that had won him his trophy, a spinning back kick, the kind that scores beautifully on a padded mat against a compliant opponent who's agreed in advance not to close the distance while your back is turned. Mind. On uneven grass against somebody who wasn't compliant, it was the single worst decision he could have made, because for a full half second he wasn't looking at me at all. Mind. I stepped inside the spin before his heel ever reached me, hooked his planted leg with my boot, and gave him one flat shove to the shoulder blade. Mind. Physics did the rest. Both feet left the ground at once, and he hit the packed dirt with a sound that made 3 separate people in the crowd wince audibly. Mind. You're on the ground, I told him. I'm quiet enough that only the silence of the whole street let it carry. That means we're done. Get up, break his legs. Mind. Gerald was screaming now, beer foam spraying off his can as he waved both arms. And that more than anything I'd done is what put the final crack in whatever composure Bryce had left. Mind. He scrambled up with no technique left in him at all, just a scared, furious 19-year-old, lowering his head and charging in for a tackle, hoping his size would finally matter once we hit the ground. It didn't. I widened my base, dropped my hips, and his charge stopped dead against me like he'd tried to move a bolted fixture. Before he could adjust, my forearm was across the side of his neck, muck hand locking it in place, a weight driving down his shoulders and bending him to the grass at a 90-degree angle. I wasn't choking him. I never intended to send that kid to a hospital, only to a decision. And breathe, I told him, low, right next to his ear. Mind. Look at the dirt. Your muscles need oxygen, and you're burning it all on panic. Mind. You're out of your depth, son. Tap when you're ready. Mind. For 5 long seconds, his boots dug trenches in the lawn. Mind. Then his hand slapped the ground 3 times, and I let go instantly and stepped back to a clean distance the way you're trained to. Mind. He lay there heaving, covered in grass stains, his gold-trimmed belt smeared with dirt, and nobody on that street clapped because nobody was celebrating. Mind. They were just quietly absorbing the fact that the flannel-wearing had dismantled a regional tournament winner in under 9 seconds without ever throwing a single punch. Mind. Gerald Whitcomb came off the golf cart like something had been unplugged inside him. And you son of a you assaulted my boy, illegal moves. Mind. I saw it. He was closing distance fast, and I turned to meet him with a different kind of stillness than because Bryce was a problem. Gerald's a control problem. And those require different tools entirely. And take one more step, Gerald, and I'll treat it as a threat to my safety, I said, and something in my voice made him stop, cold 5 feet away, fists balled, chest heaving, the animal part of his brain apparently understanding what the rest of him refused to. Mind. You're going to jail, he shouted anyway, pointing a shaking finger. Mind. I've got the best lawyers in the state on retainer. Mind. I'll take your house. I'll take everything you own. Mind. Call the police, Gerald. Let's get it all on the record. Mind. 10 minutes later, 2 Braddock County cruisers rolled up, lights cutting silent, red and blue across a street that had gone back, nothing looking like interrupted. A 2020 cook to confused neighbors, sitting devastated in the grass, and 2 grown men squared off across a lawn. Mind. Sergeant Cole Bennett got out first, a 20-year veteran with the specific, exhausted patience of a man who's heard every version of every story at least 4 times. Mind. Gerald reached him before I did, launching straight into an account where I'd apparently attacked his son unprovoked, choked, thrown him into the ground for no reason at all. Mind. Sergeant Bennett held up one hand, looked at Bryce, sitting silent and refusing to make eye contact with anyone, and then looked at me. Mind. Sir, is that true? I could answer. Walter Higgins stepped forward, 71 years old, still holding a paper plate with a half-eaten hamburger on it. Mind. That's a flat lie, officer. That boy brought gloves and threw them at Marcus's feet. Mind. He demanded the fight in front of 30 people. He charged him 3 separate times. Mind. Marcus never threw a single punch. He just kept putting him down until the boy quit. Mind. I've got video. Of crowd at a 15-year-old kid from 3 doors down, phone already raised. Mind. I started recording when Bryce started yelling. Sergeant Bennett watched the footage in total silence for almost a full minute. Mind. It showed everything in order with no ambiguity left for anyone to argue with the gloves thrown, the threats shouted, the charges, and my hands never once closing into a fist. Mind. He handed the phone back, exhaled slowly, and turned to Gerald with an expression that had gone from patient to finished. Mind. Mr. Whitcomb, based on this, your son initiated an assault, and the other party used reasonable force to defend himself. Mind. If anyone's leaving in cuffs today, it's him. Gerald's face did something I hadn't seen it do in 2 months of knowing him. It went blank with genuine disbelief. Do you have any idea who I am? I own Whitcomb Freight. Mind. I know the mayor personally. I don't care if you know the governor, sir, Bennett said. Mind. You've got 2 choices. Take your son home and sleep this off, or I arrest him for assault and you for disturbing the peace. Mind. Choose now. He chose the golf cart. Before he pulled away, he leaned out and pointed a finger at me one last time. Mind. This isn't over, Doyle. I will find out where you work, and I will burn it to the ground. Mind. I believed him completely. I also for reasons Gerald Whitcomb had absolutely no way of understanding yet. Wasn't the least bit worried about it. Mind. Here's what I have to tell you now, because it changes everything you've heard so far. And it's the part of this that Gerald Whitcomb's very expensive private investigator managed to get almost entirely wrong. Mind. My consulting firm is called Ironclad Sentry Group, and on paper, it looks exactly like what I'd always let it look like. A physical solid cyber risk assessment shop, 6 employees, a modest office suite outside Charleston. Mind. What Gerald's investigator didn't have clearance to find, because it sits behind a federal contracting wall that a Google search and a few $100s can't get through, is that Ironclad Sentry is a primary subchronic subtractor for the Department of Defense's Logistics Security Division. Mind. We vet the freight companies that get trusted to move sensitive government material. Mind. I'm not an employee there. I founded it. I'm the majority owner and the man whose signature sits on every vetting report that leaves the building. Mind. And Whitcomb Freight, the company, Gerald had spent 11 months and untold hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to grow into a 38.6 contract was sitting on my desk that week. 4 documents deep into its final security review. And Gerald didn't know any of that on the Wednesday morning. He called in a favor stain if Statewell gums at the TT golfed and the team's tweet to us on the cone with them then named General Tuish Judge, Regional Director of the Dense Logistics Procurement Office. And I know precisely how that call went because General Ashworth had been my battalion commander on my second deployment. And he called me 12 minutes after hanging up with Gerald that I had to hold the bud away from my ear. And Mark, he said, I just spent 20 minutes listening to some fella named Whitcomb demand I fire a violent, unstable contractor of yours for attacking his son at a barbecue. And did he mention his son through his punch, sir? And funny thing, he left that part out entirely. Ashworth was still chuckling. And I let him finish his whole speech, and then I informed him that Ironclad Sentry is the exact firm running final security clearance on his own company's bid, and that you happen to be the lead assessor of record on his file. And there was a very long silence on the other end of that phone, son. And how'd he take it? Like a man who just found out he'd been arguing with his own referee. And I told him that expressing this kind of documented personal animosity toward the lead federal assessor creates an unmanageable conflict of interest, and that, as a result, Whitcomb Freight is disqualified from the bidding process, effective immediately. And he just cost himself $38 million, Marcus, because he couldn't stop talking for one afternoon. And I hung up the phone and sat at my desk for a long moment, looking out toward the Whitcomb estate through the window, and I felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as quiet. And I hadn't lifted a finger to ruin that man. He'd done every ounce of the work himself, one furious phone call at a time. And the rest of it moved faster than I expected. That Friday, the fruit to the crew teenager's phone and through the TAQ split and kept apparent contact chats. And eventually at the martial arts forum where somebody chain Rex Knight the gold trimmed belt. And Coach Dalton Reyes, who ran Light Forge Combat Academy and had built his reputation 22 years, a decent and produced towards exactly this kind of thing, watched that footage twice. If he priced or showed up for Saturday class. And in front of the entire gym, Reyes stripped the black belt off him, told him he'd disgraced everything the academy stood for, and banned him from the building for life. And his training partners stopped answering his texts within the week. And the tough guy persona out had never survived contact with an actual consequence. And 3 weeks later, at a packed HOA meeting, that had been scheduled for something else entirely. Otis Grant stood up during the open comment period and described calmly and without embellishment 2 years of being chest bumped and cornered in his own delivery truck by a teenager who considered it entertainment. A 14-year-old forced into the road on her bike more than once that summer told the room she used to take the long home just to avoid the Whitcomb driveway. And one of Callie's friends, 17-year-old Ava Bishop, described sitting frozen on my patio while a grown man's sons made kissings at a group of teenage girls he'd never spoken a single kind word to. Nobody in that room needed convincing anymore. The pattern had simply been sitting there in plain sight the entire time, waiting to see someone to say it out loud in front of witnesses. Whitcomb Freight's collapse, once it started, moved with the particular speed of a company that had been leveraged to the edge of its own ambition. Losing the defense, Constrict spooked a two-proof investors propping up Gerald's expansion plans, and both pulled their financing within a month, citing what one termed in a letter that eventually became public record, a pattern of erratic leadership incompatible with continued investment. Gerald stopped driving the Range Rover like he owned the road. He stopped yelling at delivery drivers. By the time the first frost hit Braddock Hollow in late November, a moving truck was parked in the Whitcomb driveway, and a for sale sign had gone up quietly 2 weeks before that, with none of the fanfare that had announced their arrival back in June. I stood on my porch that morning with a cup of black coffee and watched the truck pull away and disappear around the bend. And for the first time since I built the Oak Street, the property left me in Ling was just a tree bag. No shadow boxing, no audience. The street stayed quiet after that in a way it hadn't been in months, and it wasn't the anxious kind of quiet either. Ron Pemberton started a new HO policy, spring, requiring any resident hosting judge gatherings to notify neighbors 48 hours in advance, a small, unremarkable rule that nobody would have thought twice about a year earlier. Otis started parking however he needed to without a second glance over his shoulder. Sophie rides her bike straight down the middle of our street now, and nobody blocks her path. I finished my coffee, went back inside, and sat down at the kitchen table to help Callie with a geometry problem she'd been stuck on for 20 minutes. She looked up at me at one point, still a little pale from everything she'd watched that Labor Day, and asked if I was okay. I'm fine, sweetheart, I told her, and I meant it completely. It's over. It was. But I want to leave you with the part of the matters. Because the fight itself was never the point. If that's the only thing you take from this story, you've missed it entirely. What separated me from Bryce Whitcomb wasn't 17 years of training, and it wasn't a federal contract sitting on my desk. It was one simple thing. I never once needed anybody else to feel small in order to feel like I mattered. He needed drivers and teenage girls and to swerve into trap to go quiet would be fair because somewhere along the way somebody had taught him that when respect was a he then sits to peak to tip its by how you treated them when nobody else was watching. Gerald taught him that lesson every single day of his life, and in the end, it cost them both everything they thought that kind of respect was supposed to buy. Real strength doesn't need volume. It doesn't need an audience, and it definitely doesn't need somebody else to lose for it to count. The quietest man in the room is very often the one who has absolutely nothing left to prove, and if there's this street learned from a summer, none of us can it. The third person, this eat is almost never the most dangerous one in it. If this story meant something to you, Hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about dignity, respect, and the moments that test both. Mind. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in Marcus's shoes. Mind. And if you know somebody who needs a reminder that quiet strength always outlasts loud cruelty, share this with them today. Mind. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. Mind. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Right. To rambles at organizations or events is purely coincidental. Mind. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. Mind. It does not make factual claims about any individual company or institution.